All right. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation. Look before you leap. My name is Akshay Sura.
And I'm Dennis Augustine. I'm one of the three partners over at Conabos. And like Akshay, I'm a multi-time Sitecore MVP. So glad you guys could be here with us today. Let me just tell you a little bit about Conabos. It's pronounced Conabos. It's one of the immortal horses of Greece. So the Greek mythology, Ares is immortal horses. Uh, Conabos, we have an inordinate number of Sitecore MVPs in the company, some 7 of them. We became a Sitecore Silver partner a little while ago. And we're really proud of having recently earned our Sitecore Content Hub specialization badge as well. When I joined Conabos all those years ago, I was really thrilled to have run into Akshay Sura and Camrus Jem and my partners and the founders of Conabos because of all they've done in the Sitecore community over the years. So many of you will know the Sitecore Hackathon, um, SubCon every year when they're actively involved in helping plan and organize that, as well as, of course, Sitecore Slack. And if you're not part of the Sitecore community Slack, you should get on that. Actually, you can tell the people how they get on the Slack again.
They can go to sitecore.chat and then fill up a form for their invite.
Excellent. And yeah, so please join us on Sitecore Chat, be part of the community, and that's really one of the reasons I was so really happy to join Conabos, is because of the involvement in the community. And Cam and Akshay are longtime heroes of mine, really. So it's my pleasure to be doing my first webinar with Akshay. I feel like I finally made it in this Sitecore game. But let's get right into it. What should you know as an exec before you get into Sitecore Content Hub? Tell them what we'll be talking about, actually.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is share some of our learnings from the process we went through when we were trying to look into Content Hub, as well as getting it, the initial process and migration. So we're going to start off with why. Why would you look at a system like Content Hub? What's included as part of Content Hub? What are the different editions of the software you could purchase, what you get from each one of them, and just having a team which is capable of looking at your requirements as well as what Content Hub can offer, and have a happy marriage between those to complement the offering so that it fits your needs. And then just in general, and this is a pet peeve of mine, it took me a long time to come to this part. That's why I kind of try to drive this point quite a bit, which is thinking about content differently. So content is not just meant for the web channel, or you have to think of it a little bit more than the web. Think of content as an omni-channel offering, and that it goes into multiple different channels, not just web.
Absolutely. And you're thinking about those kind of web and online channels, but it also goes into the 6th point there, well beyond just the web channels in general. We're talking as well. You should start to think about it as being things that you don't do on even for inside your organization. So your internal content development can also be managed in Content Hub, which could be super handy when you're working on projects or maybe even preparing to put on an event, things like that. So think beyond the website, things we want to go over as well. What should you be looking out for in the discovery phase of your project to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row before you start the implementation? That's very important when you're working with Sitecore, that you know what you're talking about. We actually especially is going to point out some of the migration gotchas that we got to be looking out for. You really want to have these in mind as you plan your content migration. And the last couple of points, to take it easy, look, walk before you run, and then we'll go over the process a little bit so you'll know what's in store for you. So starting with why, every time I go to a new company, a new team, I start to push this book, Start with Why by Simon Sinek. And the reason I love to do that is it really helps us to focus on the reasons why we're doing something. Now, that's going to be helpful for your team in executing and to really understand the purpose of everything. But it's also going to be helpful for you to evangelize in the organization for the adoption of Content Hub. And that's going to be a really important part of it as well, because it's not just a technical implementation. It really goes to the heart of everything that you do in that whole process. So you could be thinking, what's the right version of the document that I'm supposed to be working on? You're shooting things around in email. You're shooting documents through email. You're looking for images in file shares. And if you're so frustrating to remember where was the image that I should be using for this campaign again, um, where am I sure that I changed all of the source content when I changed product data? Did we cover all of the channels? Did we hit everything that we needed to change?
So, like many organizations, when you think of content, and again, it's kind of difficult to narrow down content because we are so siloed as organizations where a different team is doing different pieces of work. So, social has the social team, e-commerce does their own. But when you try to look at the whole piece of content from an organizational level, you do start to realize that you have some assets in file shares, some in this system, some in the other system, and it's been maintained in these different silos and not as one. So the messaging kind of gets lost because of this. And basically keeping up with the brand becomes difficult because each person has a different sense of what the brand is based on their silos. So trying to keep track of all of this. So imagine in this disparate system to run a social campaign which encompasses all of the departments, it just gets too difficult. You're running between different project management softwares, different softwares to do things which can all be unified. And this is normal, by the way. This is the normal state of how companies operate at this moment in time. But there's a better way to do it. There's a better way to bring all of this so that it's produced in one place. There's no different systems, and it just makes life easier. And it's done by centralizing where you build all the content. So having one place to build everything, yes, it is a huge shift from moving from interdepartment softwares and systems to one place. But once you get there, it becomes easier. So you can produce your blog posts, your Instagram posts, your social media, third-party website content, everything in one place. And you start seeing the utilization of common assets, common pieces of content. The content you would produce will be on similar lines rather than on different wavelengths.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to echo what you said there actually about that being a natural spot to be in when, you start to get a little bit more ambitious with your digital goals. You need to produce more content. You start accelerating that cadence. And, the amount of content that you have to keep up with, the number of social channels, all of the different places that you're dealing with, having this, as people have come to call it, the content crisis at that time is a totally natural thing. So makes sense, and you should not feel bad if your organization is in that spot. But centralizing the content to get out of that is really so very essential. One of the other advantages of Content Hub is, as I actually was just alluding to, though, having the ability to manage all of that in an omni-channel way. So you centralize that content and then disseminate it across the various channels. So the various channels, all you can have one view of the campaigns right across all of your multiple channels and manage those processes in that central spot as well. So Content Hub provides some tools right next to your content to be able to do that, which naturally is going to be much better than planning things out in Excel, trying to get a campaign going over email, those sorts of things, so that you can have much more transparency in how you manage your content strategy. I want to say that in addition to that kind of transparency, what happens when you also have the tools to manage those processes is that you're going to have better compliance. So you can add legal checks along the way, style checks along the way, AODA, or what's the act in the US again, actually? The ADA, American,
CCPA.
well, yes, for the privacy compliance, absolutely. Um, so you'll have much better ability to enforce compliance when you have those tools right where the content is created and manage that process that way. As a strategist, I've also really been happy to see in Content Hub the ability for us to be able to look at content in one spot and understand its effectiveness by using things like its value scoring. So that's going to provide your organization with a much better idea as to what content is effective. And that's a really important thing that you have to do. When you understand that, and I think that's the 80-20 rule, that about 80% of your value for your organization is generated by probably by about 20% of that content. Well, what is it and in what channel? That's something that you're going to need a good overview to be able to tell. And Content Hub provides you with that. So strategically, that's something that you really want to drive home with your marketing executives. Those productivity tools, and I'll take these last couple points here. Those productivity tools, those tools rather, the tools that enable you to manage it in one place, that enable you to do the assignment of tasks, to manage the processes, that's going to increase your productivity, and in and of itself is going to save a lot of money, especially when we consider how much resource intensive content production can be. And finally, I want to say that, again, as a strategist, this point really is something so essential to me. A lot of customers don't end up doing personalization. And one of the reasons for that is that they lack the content to be able to drive personalization across multiple channels, across multiple personas, and then to have a view as to whether or not they've created the right content for the different personas that they're trying to address. You have to have content agility, as we like to call it, in order to be able to drive an effective DCX program. And Content Hub provides that kind of a view. You will have seen that in one of the previous screens. You'll see that in this strategy view, you'll see an email channel, a blog channel listed, and a number of different personas listed vertically that represent the different personas that we're trying to target across these various channels. So at a glance, I can see that we don't have sporty content for email on the email channel here. We can see where our content gaps are so we can plan much more effectively. So basically, what it lets you do is take all of this and turn it into this, something a little bit more organized, something a little bit more really modern and effective in your content strategy.
All right. So which modules do we get or do we need? So as you know, Content Hub comes with several different pieces, which you can subscribe to individually, but some come by default. So when we're looking at Content Hub as a solution to what your needs are, you're talking about DAM, you're talking about CMP. So DAM is digital asset management. CMP is content marketing platform. PCM's product content management, MRM is marketing resource management. So each of these solves a different piece of the puzzle. DAM, for instance, is a storage for all your assets, regardless of what they are. So PDFs, manuals, audio files, video files, any kind of images you use. And the DAM really complements the other pieces of the Content Hub. So for instance, PCM, so product content management, is a place where you enhance product information, which is suitable for the different channels which you're trying to push your product to. So maybe you have a third party syndicated website where your products are being displayed. You could, generate content for that, your own site, your corporate site, it doesn't matter where it is. And for PCM, you have a need to store video or any of the assets which are specific to these channels. Maybe you're posting something to Instagram or you're posting something into YouTube. This is where it will source all of its assets for those products from DAM. CMP is very interesting. So content marketing platform enables you to create content types. So think about blogs, press releases, any different type of content, you're able to model it as well as create it. And of course, all of this content requires assets. So again, we fall back on DAM. So there's a big dependency in that part. MRM is like a project management tool. So you are able to manage and look at your content calendar, fill in gaps in your content calendar. If you're running a campaign of, hey, we have a product launch in 60 days, let's fill up the content calendar with blogs. We have social posts, pushing to different sites in order to create enough buzz for this specific product launch. So these four different modules complement each other pretty well. So the ones we've seen, they've pretty much gotten all the four modules, but there are situations where you might not need all of them depending on what you're trying to solve. But in order to solve content as a whole, these four do make a lot of sense and help you a lot.
Absolutely. And it's the CMP module, if I am not mistaken, you will correct me, I'm sure, that where we find that engagement scoring and all of that ability to really analyze that content from its effectiveness perspective across those channels too.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, great. This is an area where actually I really would love to hear you to really riff a little bit more about the additions, because when we were working with some of our customers with regards to choosing that, found it a little bit hard to make the choice. So let's just get right into that. Few additions.
Yeah, so one of the biggest, I guess, milestone in you deciding to go with Content Hub is actually figuring out your needs, and then based on your needs, trying to see which edition of Content Hub better suits your needs. And most of this, I would say, is driven by your budget for sure, but it also is driven by your needs to figure out what is possible and what is not. So the base level is the Pro Edition. And again, you are able to, when you're doing the data modeling and the content models, you're able to define your content model with the Content Hub team. You have the ability to add as many content types as you need for CMP, but you're restricted in terms of the actual entities and what you can do with the entities. There are a couple of things which is, for a Pro Edition, for each of these, there's a limits to the amount of storage you have, the amount of API calls you get at different thresholds. But something like a professional, a couple of the very distinguished factors are like you'll get locked into your content model once you fix it, but you can still add your CMP types, not just the entities. And then you're restricted to only one environment. Might work for you, might not work for you. It totally depends on it. Whereas the corporate edition is like a huge step up. To me, the Pro Edition is very competitive when you look at other things on the market. Just the DAM alone from another system is 2/3 of the cost of the Pro Edition with all of the pieces involved. So to me, a Pro Edition is a no-brainer for most of the situations, but depending on what you're trying to do, corporate might make a better fit for you. First, you get more storage off the bat, support as well, but you have couple of different environments at this moment. So it kind of helps you vet out all your changes on one environment, export it, and then import it into your production environment. That kind of helps you a little bit. Also, being able to do content modeling. So it helps quite a bit because now you have more control over your structures, not just on the CMP types, but also a little bit of flexibility in terms of the entities. And last but not the least, the enterprise edition, basically you get the whole gamut, everything, including all the environments, more storage. You have your own instance, so it's much faster. Not that the other ones are anything to laugh at, they're very decent. You wouldn't notice much of a difference, but here you have your own. You have premium support, which helps you quite a bit. But honestly, what we've seen is once you start implementing it and you have a knowledgeable staff who have worked with Content Hub, I have not seen any support issues so far. I mean, the only thing I can think of is the environment issues if they come up, but we haven't seen any issues. So again, we have three different editions you could look into based on your needs, and having a trusted partner who has worked with Content Hub will help you determine which one fits your bill.
Absolutely. And the non-production environments in the corporate side are sandbox add-ons, and on the enterprise side included. So, it's also important distinction. You pay a little bit extra for those non-prod in corporate, but enterprise you don't. And I can't say enough about that, making that choice about the free-form content modeling, how important that is, because as you're doing your discovery, and you have to understand really how that works. So really work with your experienced Sitecore partner when you're doing your content modeling to determine whether or not you're going to be painted into a hole without the ability to do free form modeling. So that's something very important to consider. That's going to make all the difference probably between choosing between corporate and professional for most organizations. Okay. Let's talk briefly about a few things. We're coming up about halfway through, and I want to pick up the pace just a bit. Talking about putting your team together. Who needs to be engaged when you are starting to do plan for your Content Hub project? Well, pretty much everybody. Certainly, I can't say enough about engaging with executives early and really to win them over. That goes back to that start with why. That kind of messaging is what you'll need to get to have your executive stakeholders on board, because you're going to need champions to affect the kind of organizational change that comes along with implementing something like Content Hub. It's not just a tool to implement on its own. It requires changing in your organization. So requires how you change about thinking about strategy. So your digital strategist will be involved. Um, People on the ground are going to really need to be involved with regards to the process, because they are the ones who know how they produce that content and who they have to run things by, all of that stuff. So involve the content producers who are in the trenches. Make sure, because of that organizational change, that your change champions, your trainers, your change management team are involved in your early stage planning and understand what's laying ahead. Certainly your technical and business owners of those source systems, the destination systems, and your experienced Sitecore partners. So um, do reach out if you need any help, advice to us on the various channels. We'll put some information at the end of the presentation, how you can find out more about how you can get some help. And I'll go back to how Akshay and Cam always have been in the community, more than willing to help other partners, customers, and so forth.
Yeah, this is an interesting piece. So this is something which we had a difficult time in terms of trying to bring everyone to the table. What I mean by that is thinking about content from a central place. So all these years we've thought about content in silos, as we've mentioned before, having different teams doing different parts. But now you're starting to think of content as a whole in one place, and it's a huge shift. It's a shift from using different tools to one tool, moving different departments. So think about, what's involved in terms of logistics from a content perspective. You have people who don't even look at a website being part of producing that content, people who are technical in terms of coming up with the spec sheets for your product, for instance, who really don't need to be on your site, but they are the ones who are designing these products. They are the ones who have the specs, blueprints for these in some place. And all the way from that to your actual staff who are producing this content and pushing it to these different channels. But from an organizational perspective, this has to be a change from top down all across. Expectations have to be set in terms of, hey, this is what we are hoping to do. We do not want to do cold turkey, cut and dry, and just change things on you. But think about a phased approach of how we would get to that final state, making sure everyone's on board, making sure everyone is trained, making sure everyone knows why are we doing this, because we want to produce content which is consistent with the brand. Why should we use Content Hub or a similar system to that? Because we want one central place to be the gold content from which everything comes out. So whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a syndicated third-party website, whether it's your own site, it does not matter. You get everything from that one central place. So I think this is a very interesting piece of the entire puzzle, which we went through with the customers, and I think that's one piece of it, which is the initial part, the buy-in, the education, the training. But then there's a secondary part to this, which talks about how exactly. So now I've been producing this piece of content in my website for the past 6 years, and now you're telling me I can't produce it on my website CMS anymore, regardless of what that CMS is. If you're using Sitecore as your CMS, well, great, because you get the CMP and the DAM connectors. It makes your life a little bit easier. But say if you're using a different CMS, for instance, now you have to plan for that. How exactly is that going to change? So someone who's used to going into WordPress or whatever that is to produce content day in, day out, now has to go into Content Hub, and you have to cater to their needs to make sure that it's not slowing down their process of producing content. At the same time, seamlessly make that connection between Content Hub and the third-party CMS, that the content flows through to that channel the way it does. And that's just taking one channel. Now you have to start thinking about different channels, and it gets a little bit complicated. So this is a very interesting piece of the entire puzzle for me personally, because education, making sure everyone's on the same track, you estimated things properly so that all the integrations which need to be made, I think is a very crucial piece of this puzzle.
Absolutely. And I think that that last bullet, when it talks about how it's done a little bit differently in terms of, in the Sitecore specific context, pushing things into a bucket rather than into that structured content tree. So Content Hub then serving as the source for you to be able to find that content, create it, and publish it to the different sources. But when it comes to the presentation aspect, you're going to have to do a little bit of thinking about how you change your, perhaps your architecture of your solution a little bit, and the kind of workflow of how you set up pages and so forth, how you relate content to each other in order to make sure that you've accounted for that. So again, think about the implications of how you are be doing content differently in the future as you get into this whole exercise. Uh, One slide here for this. Again, I'm going to just underscore a little bit more that the web content, your website is just the tip of the iceberg, the content iceberg. There is so much that you do that you have not really been thinking about, I'm sure, in the context of something like Content Hub. So whether all of those internal documents that you've been creating, all of the preparation for events and webinars and other things, whether it be internal facing or external facing, think about how much time you could be saving, how much more efficient your efforts could be if you had a tool to centrally manage that and to really drive some productivity along there. When you think about when you make an ROI case for Content Hub, just based on the amount of content work we do in an organization, I think it's a no-brainer. It pays for itself. So that's something I really want everybody to really think about. And it's also another great selling feature that makes the people outside of the digital marketing channels interested in Content Hub as well.
All right, another interesting piece of the puzzle. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, well, yeah, the discovery phase, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as a BA, I mean, I wish when we got into our first Content Hub projects that we had a little bit more leeway or a little bit more fair warning about all the things we needed to know in the discovery phase. We just listed a few here. Some things that you really got to be engaged with is engage everybody who's involved in the content lifecycle. So everybody from the planning and ideation, the people who come up with strategy, all the way down to those who are actually producing the content, publishing it to different channels, and folks who have got to decide when to take content down. So compliance and people who are making up retention policies and things like that need to be involved. Train your decision makers early so everybody knows what they're talking about when they're talking about Content Hub and what's possible, so that you can really nail that down. And actually, I mean, in your role as a solution architect there, I think that this third point was really something that bears some underscoring, like to really make sure that you have your data structures set solid before you start engaging with Sitecore.
Yeah, so I think for me this was interesting, right? So I feel like now that we've done it, it's easier for us to walk through the customer or the resources involved in the actual discovery phase through what exactly is needed. Initially, it was a little bit difficult. So you're defining these data structures of what data do you need? Do you need everything which is in the PIM? The answer is no, you don't, because PIM already stores those pieces of information. What you're looking for is some of the metadata for the content you're trying to store, for instance, a product in this case, but then a lot of the newer pieces of info you want to store, which are going to replace content in your different channels. And I think just understanding that that is what is being asked of you, it was a big hurdle for us. So now when you're trying to look for changes in terms of replacing an existing CMS. So if your existing CMS stores a blog post with, title, body, X and Y, you would need to replicate those structures in the appropriate CMP types in your CMP content model, domain model spreadsheet. So just that little bit of understanding, I think spending a good half an hour on looking at the domain model spreadsheets, going over it with the team, specifying what the end goal is, and have an iterative process within a few days where you're going back, talking about it. It might seem laborious and lengthy, but there's a lot to learn here. So you're trying to learn about what gets stored where, and why would that information be useless to you for the rest of the time you'll be using Content Hub? It won't, because that's a very valuable piece of information. So just going through that with the team, coming up with the final thing, and then once you think you're done with the domain model, you are able to go back and forth with the Content Hub team, which is assigned to you, and they are able to guide you appropriately, saying, hey, you know what, this piece of info which you're trying to represent, is it for a purpose of just listing, or do you want to have its own metadata? And again, having a proper Sitecore partner who's done this before would help you with half those, and then the Content Hub team would pick up on the rest of them, and that kind of makes it a little bit easier from a data structure perspective.
Right. And thinking about the data structures, I mean, again, that's part business analysis, part, kind of just, data structure design. So your solution architect needs to be involved, because deciding what systems own what data and how it flows through your organization is going to be a really important thing for you to establish as you're getting into this. So, yeah, pay close attention to that, understand who owns what. Um, where are you today in terms of what your workflow is? Where do you want to be going in the future state? And once you've done all of those things and consulted with legal about compliance requirements, you'll be ready to start to engage with the Sitecore team and get the work done. This area here is one actually that you've blogged on quite a bit recently about the Content Hub migration, and love for you just to help us understand some of the pitfalls of the migration process if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, so migration was quite interesting. So we were migrating hundreds and thousands of assets from different systems, just from an asset perspective. And what we found was there are a couple of inbuilt ways to migrate assets, for instance, which is you could either drag and drop, how many ever assets at a time into the Content Hub UI, or you could get an Excel sheet which is generated based on your schema by the Content Hub team, and you're able to fill in this sheet with the metadata for the file as well as a public link. So any of the assets you want to import into Content Hub, either via the API method, or the web client SDK method, or the Excel file method, you need a public link in order to be able to pull those assets in. Whereas a drag and drop, the assets on your local machine or network drive, and you're able to drop in. Now, where it becomes difficult is think about the number of assets you have in your different systems. So in your CMS alone, you probably have 20, 30,000 assets. In your other systems where you hold different types of content, you might have many more depending on the type of company you are, your store, maybe you have knowledge management with PDF generated somewhere else. So to move all of that with either drag and drop or the Excel method, I think it's not
Wow,
applicable to you. It's just asinine to do that,
a lot.
just because of the sheer volume of uh, data you need to move, the manual process. It just makes it a little bit difficult. So what we've worked on and perfected is we have all of our middleware set in our Azure functions, which are capable of pulling this information from your different systems and pushing them into Content Hub. So if you're talking about just assets, it's capable of looking at your local CMS, especially if it's Sitecore. It's able to pull all of the assets out of your media library, push them out to Content Hub, create public links, and assign attributes to them. So what was the item ID for that image inside your media library? What are the tags based on the directory structure? So you're able to always relate back the item and the asset inside of your Content Hub with the image or asset inside of your media library. It makes a lot of you know sense to do it that way. Moving content again, so say if your CMS or any other system has a lot of information to do with uh, products or articles, blogs, whatever that is, we are able to easily move those hundreds and thousands. And that's one of the reasons why we choose Azure Functions over anything else, is we're able to run these simultaneous transactions, thousands at a time, and scale up as much as we need to cater to the amount of data being moved. So moving those is kind of interesting. So that's just, again, half of the puzzle, which is getting it from your existing systems into Content Hub is one piece, and then the other one is to pull it down, right? So if you're using the Sitecore CMS, great, because we have our DAM and CMP connector. The DAM connector lets you, pick your assets, just like how you pick from the media library from the DAM connector in your Sitecore CMS. Works great. The CMP connector, a new version was released last month. We have a talk coming up at Symposium next week on the new version of CMP connector and the roadmap. And that kind of helps you pull all the CMP data back in, as Dennis mentioned, into bucket. So you have to reprogram a little bit on your front end perspective from looking at a local data source or a site level data source to, a different place where you dump all of these content types of a specific type. But if you're using a third party system or like say Siteco Commerce, for instance, you would have to write an API connected there, and we've seamlessly integrated or that part for our customers where products which are in the final workflow state get pushed into a service bus, and that gets pulled into Siteco Commerce automatically on demand as well as nightly. So we are able to sync it. So if we're able to do that, we would be able to help you with integrating into your other systems where the content needs to be pulled back from Content Hub as well.
Absolutely. And just having the ability in that scripting to update the reference sources, the sources that were referring to the assets and the content during the migration process itself will save you so much time. So I encourage everybody to check out Akshay's videos and blog posts about content migration in all the different areas. You got some ones about DAM, CMP, and PCM. Check those out and reach out if you need any help in progress migration. Reach out on Slack, reach out to us personally. Check out the migration service that we had recently launched as well. Have a bunch of tools that actually was referring to help you along that process. Again, single slide here. I think we've mentioned this a couple times, that there's a lot of organizational change that happens when you're implementing something like this. So it's going to change how the whole ideation to creation to approval and publishing and even analysis processes. So take baby steps, come along slowly, walk before you run. And there'll be lots of time for you to make that transformation in your organization. So really highly encourage teams not to over-engineer process. Don't think you're going to have a auto magical solution to all of your kind of process woes. It's, Content Hub won't solve those issues any more than Excel will balance your checkbook. So take your time and get accustomed to it before you try to do much more engineering of things like process. And speaking of process, the actual steps to get here. So it's one of the last things before I let actually wrap up and tell us how you can get some more information, is to make sure that you leave lots of time for implementation. That was one of the things I think that we wish we had done the few times. So want to make sure that you leave lots of time for that in your planning. It can take up to 3 months to implement. That's not counting your discovery time, your lead time from your planning, just after you engage with a Sitecore team. So make sure that you leave lots of time in your project plan for that, and you'll be a lot safer in your planning for Content Hub. Well, actually, why don't you take the folks home? I hope you've gotten some information that they can use. And
Yep.
yes, Mr. Sura.
Sorry, I was on mute. Anyway, so
That's
we
okay.
produce quite a bit of content on our site with regards to Content Hub, blog posts, webinars, what have you. So be sure to visit our website. We're very reachable. We're in all Sitecore social channels, and we're pretty active on social networks like Twitter and LinkedIn. So, don't be afraid to reach out, even if it's a question, or post it on that Content Hub channel on Sitecore Slack, and we'll be more than happy to help you out.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a good day.
Thanks again. Bye.